The courtroom was a theatre of high-stakes cruelty, and Ilara Vance was the star victim. Her soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian Vance, smirked as his shark-like lawyer painted Ilara as a pathetic, delusional fool. They were fighting over the scraps of their marriage, and Julian was there to ensure she got nothing. He watched, dripping in his Tom Ford suit, as she was mocked for requesting a single, worthless asset. But Julian made one fatal mistake. He thought the woman he married was a penniless nobody. He was about to find out that the nobody he was publicly humiliating owned the very world he was so desperate to impress. The air in courtroom 3B of the Manhattan Superior Court was stale and heavy with the scent of old wood polish and quiet desperation. It was a place designed to diminish people, to make them feel small beneath the towering mahogany dais and the unblinking gaze of the state seal. For Ilara Vance, it was working. She sat at the defendant's table, though in a divorce, both were plaintiffs and defendants, on a hard wooden bench. Her clothes were a testament to her new status. A simple black dress, bought on sale at Macy's, and a thin grey cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. She looked, as her husband's lawyer intended, like a ghost. Across the aisle, Julian Vance looked like a king. His suit was a bespoke Tom Ford, midnight blue, radiating an aura of casual, brutal expense. His $40,000 Patek Philippe watch caught the fluorescent light as he whispered to his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Harding from the prestigious firm of Hadrian and Voss. She was known as the Harpy in legal circles, a name she'd earned by eviscerating witnesses with a smile. "Your Honor," Ms. Harding said, her voice like chilled vodka, "we are here today because Mrs. Vance, my client, is being unreasonable. Mr. Vance, in his immense generosity, has offered a settlement that far exceeds what a woman of her contributions deserves." Julian's immense generosity was a one-time payout of $50,000 and 2 years of $500 a month alimony, a pittance. It was just enough to be insulting, a severance package for 6 years of her life. And what, the judge, a weary woman named Judge Marion Green, asked, is the sticking point? Miss Harding smiled, a thin reptilian gesture. "That is the truly baffling part, Your Honor. Mr. Vance has offered to let her keep the apartment's furniture. He has offered the cash settlement, but Mrs. Vance is refusing to sign." She turned, her eyes landing on Ilara with theatrical pity. "She is demanding a cabin." A few people in the gallery, mostly Julian's paralegals and one of his junior partners, stifled a laugh. "A cabin," Judge Green repeated, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Indeed," Harding continued, pacing. "A dilapidated shack in upstate New York, left to Mr. Vance by a distant uncle. The property is landlocked, has no running water, and the roof collapsed 3 winters ago. Its assessed value is, generously, $50,000. The same as the cash offer she is rejecting." She leaned in toward the judge's bench. "My client believes his ex-wife is unwell, that she is not of sound mind to make this decision. She is obsessed with this worthless piece of land. We believe she is holding up this divorce out of spite, or perhaps a complete detachment from reality." Julian sighed, a perfect performance of a long-suffering husband. "She always was sentimental, Your Honor, and not very good with numbers. I handled all the finances, of course. She just was. The mockery was thick. She just was. A piece of ornamental furniture. The pretty, quiet wife of a brilliant private equity partner. Ilara had been a barista at a high-end coffee shop in Soho when they met. He was the master of the universe who had saved her. Ilara's own lawyer, a court-appointed legal aide named Mr. Chen, stood up. He was young, idealistic, and completely outgunned. Your Honor, my client has been clear. She does not want the alimony. She does not want the furniture. She is willing to waive all other claims in exchange for the deed to the Sullivan County property. Harding laughed, a short, sharp bark. You see, it's madness. She wants to be a hermit? Live in a shack? She has no job, no prospects. My client is trying to protect her from herself. We are asking the court to find her request frivolous, to enforce the original cash settlement, and to finalize this divorce so Mr. Vance can move on with his life. Julian leaned forward, speaking for the first time, his voice dripping with false concern. Elara, honey, be reasonable. Take the money. Get a nice little apartment. What are you going to do with a broken-down cabin? You can't even change a tire. It's pathetic. Pathetic. The word hung in the air. Elara looked down at her hands, clasped in her lap. They were shaking. Not from fear, as Julian assumed. Not from sadness, as Mr. Chen assumed. But from a rage so cold and so deep it threatened to freeze the room. She felt Julian's eyes on her and his new girlfriend, Chloe, a 24-year-old Instagram model, sitting in the back row. Chloe was wearing a Cartier Justin Clou bracelet that Elara recognized, because she'd seen the receipt for it on Julian's desk 3 months before he'd, lovingly, told her their marriage was over. Mrs. Vance, Judge Green said, her patience wearing thin. Do you have anything to say? Why this cabin? Elara slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, which Julian had always called simple and doe-like, were now as hard as slate. She looked past her lawyer, past Miss Harding, and directly at her husband. It has sentimental value, she said, her voice quiet but clear. Harding pounced. Sentimental value. Your Honor, sentiment doesn't pay rent. This is a waste of the court's time. We demand— Your Honor, I believe you are proceeding under a false premise. The voice that cut through the courtroom was not Elara's. It was new, it was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that silenced Miss Harding mid-word. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom had opened. 2 men and 1 woman stood there, all dressed in suits that made Julian's $10,000 Tom Ford look like a discount rack item. The man in the center, the one who had spoken, was tall and silver-haired, perhaps in his late 60s. He wore a flawless, dark grey Brioni suit. He was not a lawyer. He was the lawyer. This was a man who didn't just argue cases, he ended them. Julian and Miss Harding stared, confused. Judge Green looked over her glasses. And who are you, sir? This is a closed hearing. The man walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He moved with the unhurried grace of a predator. He was followed by his 2 associates, who carried polished leather briefcases. My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor, the man said, his voice a polite baritone. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am from the law firm of Blackman, Croft and Sterling. A gasp went through the room. Even Julian's face paled. Blackman, Croft and Sterling wasn't just a law firm. It was a global power broker. They represented nations, not people. They didn't do divorces. I am here, Arthur Pendleton continued, to represent my client. Harding found her voice, though it was now a full octave higher. Your Honor, this is irregular. Mrs. Vance is represented by Mr. Chen. Pendleton gave Mr. Chen a brief, almost kind nod. Mr. Chen has performed admirably, but his services are no longer required. We have already filed the substitution of counsel. My firm is now counsel of record for— He paused, letting the silence stretch. He turned his gaze to Elara, who was now standing. The transformation was electric. The slumped, pathetic, woman was gone. In her place stood someone poised, confident, and utterly cold. Pendleton smiled. For Miss Ilara, Thorne. The name Thorne hung in the air, meaningless to most. Julian and Harding looked at each other, confused. Thorne, Julian whispered. Her maiden name was Miller. Pendleton ignored him. Your Honor, there has been a significant misunderstanding. Miss Thorne is not destitute. She is not unwell. And she is certainly not pathetic. What is the meaning of this? Judge Green demanded, her eyes on the documents Pendleton's associate was handing to the clerk. The meaning, Your Honor, Pendleton said, is that my client, Miss Ilara Thorne, is the sole heir and primary stakeholder of Thorne Global. If Blackman, Croft and Sterling had caused a gasp, Thorne Global detonated a bomb. There was no one in that room, no one in the world of finance, who didn't know that name. Thorne Global wasn't a company. It was an empire, a private, reclusive, multinational behemoth with controlling interests in everything from advanced technology and pharmaceuticals to private banking and global shipping. It was $100 billion shadow that moved markets. Julian Vance's face went from confused to pale to a sickly, mottled grey. His jaw hung open. Her father, Julian stammered. She said her father was a postman. She said he died. Ilara finally spoke. Her voice was no longer the quiet whisper. It was the clear, commanding tone of a CEO. I said my father was a postman, Julian, which was true. He worked for the post office for 6 months in 1978. Then he founded a small data logistics company in his garage. She looked at him, her eyes devoid of any emotion. And I never said he was dead. I said he was gone. He is a very private man. A very private man, Pendleton interjected, by the name of Marcus Thorne, the reclusive billionaire Marcus Thorne. The puzzle pieces were slamming into place with the force of a train crash. 6 years ago, Ilara Thorne, daughter of the most powerful and secretive man in the world, had grown tired of the gilded cage. She was sick of men who saw her as a walking, talking acquisition. She wanted to know if anyone could love her. Ilara Miller, her mother's maiden name, the quiet book lover who worked at a coffee shop. And then Julian Vance had walked in, handsome, ambitious, and utterly charming. He was a rising star at Apex Strategy Group, a major consulting firm. He loved, he said, that she was so real, so grounded. He loved that she had no interest in money or power. For 6 years, she had played the part perfectly. She managed their modest, by his standards, apartment. She hosted his partners, smiling quietly. She pretended not to understand the complex financial jargon he used to impress his friends. Julian hadn't just married a nobody. He had married the human equivalent of a stealth bomber. Your Honor, Pendleton continued, Ms. Thorne is not interested in Mr. Vance's generous offer of $50,000, seeing as her personal trust, which she has not touched in 6 years, is valued at approximately $4.8 billion. She has no need of his alimony. Miss Harding looked like she was going to be physically sick all over her $2,000 Prada pumps. Then what is this about? Harding stammered. The cabin. Why the cabin? Ah, yes, the cabin, Ilara said, stepping forward. The dilapidated shack. You're right, Julian. I'm not good with numbers, but I am good with assets. Pendleton handed another file to the clerk. The cabin, Your Honor, sits on a 50-acre plot. What Mr. Vance, in his financial brilliance, failed to ascertain is that this land is not landlocked. It has a 20-foot access easement, and more importantly, it sits directly on top of the Helios data pipeline, the single largest fiber-optic trunk line on the East Coast. Thorn Global, through a subsidiary, installed that line 5 years ago. Julian looked like he'd been shot. Ilara continued. The shack itself is a concrete reinforced data node, disguised to look rustic. The land alone, with its data access rights, is worth approximately— what was it, Arthur? $98 million, Miss Thorne, Pendleton said, without blinking. The courtroom was utterly silent. Chloe, in the back row, had her phone out, but her hand was shaking too hard to text. My client, Pendleton said, is prepared to buy the property from Mr. Vance at its current assessed value of $50,000, as he is so fond of quoting. Julian stared, his mind finally catching up. Wait, no. If it's worth that, it's a marital asset. I'm entitled to half of $98 million. Harding was on her feet. Yes, Your Honor, this changes everything. This is concealment of assets. Ilara smiled. It was the first time she had smiled all day, and it was terrifying. It was a smile of pure, surgical ice. No, Julian, it doesn't. What? What do you mean? Julian said, his voice a pathetic squeak. You're right, Miss Harding, Ilara said, turning to the stunned lawyer. It is about concealment of assets, but not mine. Pendleton nodded to his associate, who placed a heavy, bound document on Miss Harding's table. Your Honor, Pendleton announced, we are hereby withdrawing the current divorce petition. We are filing a new, at-fault petition for divorce, and concurrently a civil suit against Mr. Julian Vance, Ms. Chloe Decker, and the consulting firm Apex Strategy Group. Julian's blood drained from his face. A civil suit? For what? This is insane. She's lying. Am I? Ilara's voice cut him off. For 6 years, Julian, I just was. I was the quiet, simple wife. And you were the brilliant strategist. You'd come home, stressed from your big deals, and you'd talk. She started to pace, her simple black dress now looking less like a mark of poverty, and more like a uniform of judgment. You'd talk a lot. You'd boast. You thought I was too stupid to understand. You'd leave your laptop open, your phone on the table. You'd take calls in front of me, using codes you thought I'd never crack. She stopped directly in front of him. You were right about one thing. That cabin is sentimental. It's the first property my father ever acquired. It's where he built his first server. It's a symbol. And you tried to steal it. I didn't, Julian cried, looking to the judge for help. It's just land. No, Julian, it's more than that, Ilara said. You found out about the data line. You, the brilliant strategist. You had Apex Strategy Group do a deep dive on non-performing assets in your personal portfolio. You found the data easement, and you thought, how do I cash in? Pendleton took over, his voice a grim monotone. Mr. Vance, using his position at Apex, formed a shell corporation. Acheron Imports, I believe, to mask his intentions. He then attempted to sell the data rights of that land to a rival tech conglomerate, a direct competitor of Thorn Global. Julian was visibly shaking, sweat pouring down his temples. But he couldn't sell the land, Pendleton continued, because he was still married. And in New York, a spouse must sign off on the sale of joint property. That, Your Honor, is why Mr. Vance filed for divorce. Not because he fell in love with Ms. Decker. He motioned to Chloe, who looked like she wanted to evaporate. He needed Ilara off the deed. He offered her $50,000 for a $98 million asset. He tried to defraud her. But it gets worse. Ilara's eyes bored into Julian's. You see, Julian, you weren't just cheating on me. You were committing corporate espionage, and you were using me to do it. What? What? You'd come home, Ilara said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. And you'd ask me innocent questions. Hey, Alara, you're good with patterns. Does this logo look familiar? You'd show me shell company names. Borealis, Epsilon, Project White Fang. You were trying to see if I recognized any of my father's holding companies. You were using your simple wife as a corporate spy. She leaned closer. I named Acheron Imports, remember? You asked me for a cool-sounding classical name. Acheron. The river of woe, of loss, of pain. I thought you'd appreciate the classics, Julian. I knew exactly what you were. I just needed to see how far you'd go. The final piece clicked into place. The trial wasn't for the divorce. It was a trap. Ilara had set the whole thing up. She let him file. She let him offer the insulting settlement. She knew he wanted the cabin, and her counteroffer to take the cabin was the one thing he couldn't allow. He had to fight her. He had to paint her as unstable, as irrational, to get the judge to force the cash settlement, leaving the cabin and its data rights in his name. And he had walked right into it. You knew, he whispered, horrified. This whole time? From the moment you had your secretary accidentally email me the reservation for the business trip to St. Bart's with Chloe? Yes, Julian. I knew. The courtroom was in absolute chaos. Judge Green was pounding her gavel, calling for order, but no one could hear her over the frantic whispering. Ms. Harding, for her part, looked like she had seen a ghost. She was backing away from Julian, as if his corruption were physically contagious. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of this. My firm was retained under false pretenses. We moved to recuse. Motion denied, Judge Green snapped, her face flushed with anger. You will sit down, Ms. Harding. You wanted to waste this court's time? Congratulations. You've succeeded. Mr. Pendleton, what is this new suit? The civil suit, Your Honor, Pendleton said, is for damages totaling $500 million. For fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. 500 million? Julian choked out. I don't have that. That's insane. That is only the civil suit, Mr. Vance, Pendleton said, with a chilling lack of emotion. He nodded to the doors at the back. They opened again. This time it wasn't a high-priced lawyer. It was two uniformed NYPD officers and a man in a dark federal-issue suit. Julian Vance, the man in the suit said, flashing a badge. SEC, white-collar crimes. You're under arrest for insider trading, wire fraud, and conspiracy. No! Julian shrieked, scrambling back, knocking over his chair. No, Ilara, tell them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Honey, please, I love you. I always loved you. He lunged toward her, but he didn't get within 10 feet. A man who had been sitting quietly in the back row, dressed in a simple, ill-fitting suit, suddenly stood up. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He wasn't a spectator. He was Ilara's personal security. In one move, he had Julian's arm twisted behind his back, his face pressed against the smooth, polished wood of his own defense table. Get off me! Julian screamed, his voice muffled. This is assault! I'll sue you! Ms. Harding yelled, now completely hysterical. Mr. Graves, Ilara said calmly. The security man, Graves, did not release Julian, but looked to her. That's enough! The SEC agent stepped forward and snapped handcuffs on Julian's wrists. Julian Vance, you have the right to remain silent. Julian's head whipped around, his eyes wild and bulging. He stared at Ilara, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You bitch! You set me up! You ruined me! Ilara simply watched, her expression unreadable, as they pulled him to his feet. His $10,000 suit was twisted, his hair disheveled. The master of the universe was just a common criminal. As they hauled him past the bar, he made one last, desperate attempt, looking at Chloe. "Chloe, tell them. We were in love." Chloe, however, was having her own problems. An NYPD officer was standing in front of her. "Ma'am, Miss Chloe Decker, we have some questions for you down at the precinct about several large wire transfers to your bank account." Chloe burst into tears, the Cartier bracelet clinking as she covered her face. Julian was dragged out of the courtroom, screaming. The doors slammed shut, leaving a sudden, ringing silence. Elara stood alone in the center of the room. She took a deep breath, the first one she felt she'd taken in 6 years. Judge Green, looking pale, stared at Pendleton. "Mr. Pendleton, what happens to the divorce hearing?" Pendleton adjusted his tie. "My client, Miss Thorne, is granting the divorce. She will not be seeking any assets. She will not be seeking any compensation. She just wants it done." "Granted," Judge Green said immediately, slamming her gavel. "This marriage is dissolved. This court is adjourned." Elara nodded once, a curt dismissal. She turned, not to her new, high-powered lawyer, but to her old, outgunned one. She walked over to Mr. Chen, who was staring, dumbfounded, at the pile of documents. She put her hand on his arm. "Mr. Chen, you believed me when no one else would. You fought for me. Thank you." She slipped a simple white business card from her cardigan pocket. "Arthur is handling your student loan debt. This is my personal card. I'm building a new philanthropic division for the Thorne Foundation. I need a director. Someone who believes in fighting for the underdog. The job is yours if you want it." Mr. Chen looked at the card. "Elara Thorne, CEO, Thorne Foundation." He looked up, his eyes wide. Yes, thank you." "Good," Elara said. She then walked, not ran, to the exit. Mr. Graves held the door for her. Arthur Pendleton and his team fell in behind her. She didn't look back. The scene outside the courthouse was pandemonium. Word had traveled from the courtroom to the street with the speed of light. Chloe's frantic texts, the sudden appearance of the SEC, the name Thorne. It had created a media firestorm. Reporters from every major news outlet were swarming the steps, a sea of microphones and cameras. Miss Thorne, is it true you're Marcus Thorne's daughter?" "Elara, why the secret? What will happen to Julian Vance? Are you now the richest woman in New York?" When Elara emerged, the crowd surged, but they were met by a wall. Graves was one man, but now he was flanked by 4 more, all in identical dark suits, who had seemingly materialized from a fleet of black, armored Cadillac Escalades that had just pulled up to the curb. Elara didn't flinch. The shy barista was gone forever. The woman who stood on the courthouse steps was someone else, entirely. Her posture was straight, her chin high. She was no longer Elara Vance, the victim. She was Elara Thorne, the victor. She stopped. The crowd went silent, sensing she was about to speak. She looked directly into the camera of the largest network. "My name is Elara Thorne," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "For 6 years I lived a quiet life. I learned that the man who promised to love me only valued weakness. He mistook my silence for ignorance, and my kindness for stupidity." She paused, letting the words land. "Today my marriage is over. My husband, Julian Vance, was arrested for crimes he committed against my family's company and against his own. He tried to defraud me. He tried to humiliate me, and he failed." A reporter shouted, "What about Apex Strategy Group? Did they know?" Elara's gaze was chilling. A fish rots from the head. Mr. Vance was a partner at Apex. Their culture of arrogance allowed him to believe he was untouchable. They will be hearing from my lawyers. All of them. A shiver went through the press corps. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a declaration of war. As for me, she continued, my quiet life is over. But my work is just beginning. The Thorn name comes with a responsibility and a power that I have ignored for too long. I will not be making that mistake again. She didn't say another word. She walked down the steps, her team forming a perfect wedge around her. Graves opened the door to the lead escalade, and she slipped inside, the smoked glass hiding her from view. Inside the car, the world was silent. The noise of the street was instantly cut off. Arthur Pendleton was already inside, on a satellite phone. "Yes, Marcus," he was saying. "It's done." No, she was perfect. Yes, the assets are secure. Julian Vance will be in a federal holding cell by dinner. Apex is already in free fall. "Yes, sir. I'll tell her." He hung up and turned to Ilara, who was staring out the window as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "Your father sends his congratulations," Arthur said. He said, "Welcome home." Ilara watched the reflection of the Manhattan skyline sliding past. She felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't triumph, it was alignment. Like a bone that had been broken for 6 years had finally been set. "Arthur," she said. "Yes, Mr. Thorn?" "Get a team to the Apex offices. I want a full asset lock by 5 p.m. I want to see their server logs, their client lists, and every email Julian Vance has sent in the last 3 years. The SEC can have him. I want his network." Arthur Pendleton smiled. "With pleasure." "And Arthur?" "Yes?" "Have a crew sent to the upstate property. I want that cabin demolished, and I want the new Thorn Global Data Security Hub built on that land. Something appropriate. Something worth 100 million. I'll see to it personally," he replied. Ilara nodded. "Good. Now let's go to the office. I haven't been in a while. I imagine there's a lot of work to do." The days that followed were a blur of scorched earth efficiency. Ilara Thorn was a name on the lips of everyone, from Wall Street to Mayfair. The story was irresistible. The secret heiress, the billionaire's takedown, the barista who owned the world. But for the players involved, it was not a story. It was a reckoning. Julian Vance. Julian's fate was swift and brutal. Denied bail, Arthur Pendleton personally argued he was a flight risk with access to stolen data. He sat in a federal cell. His assets were frozen. His partners at Apex disavowed him, claiming he was a rogue agent. But the evidence Ilara had been quietly compiling for 18 months, every boast, every careless phone call, was a perfect damning timeline. His trial was a formality. Facing an airtight case and the full weight of Thorn Global's legal team, he pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. He lost his licenses, his reputation, and every cent he had ever made. Ms. Harding and Hadrian and Vosse? The harpy had her wings clipped. Ilara filed a formal complaint with the New York Bar Association for malicious prosecution and unethical conduct. An investigation was launched into Hadrian and Vosse's aggressive tactics. Several of their high-profile clients, not wanting to be associated with the firm that had so publicly and disastrously mocked a Thorn, quietly moved their retainers. Miss Harding was encouraged to take an extended sabbatical. She was never seen in a high-stakes courtroom again. Chloe Decker. The mistress learned a hard lesson. The wire transfers were proven to be payments for data services. Julian had been using her to move money to other shell accounts. She was charged as a co-conspirator. In exchange for her testimony against Julian, she received 5 years probation, but the court ordered her to repay every gift Julian had given her. The Cartier bracelet, the designer bags, the down payment on her condo, all of it was seized. She was last seen working at a phone kiosk in a shopping mall. Apex Strategy Group. This was Ilara's masterstroke. As she'd predicted, the fish rotted from the head. The investigation into Julian revealed a deep, systemic culture of corruption at Apex. They weren't just consultants, they were corporate raiders, using a network of shell companies, many of which Julian had foolishly revealed to Ilara, to short-sell their own clients. Thorn Global didn't just sue them, they acquired them. In a hostile takeover that took less than 72 hours, Ilara bought the company for pennies on the dollar, leveraging its own debt against it. She walked into the boardroom on a Friday, fired the entire executive board, and installed her own team. She then held a company-wide meeting. Apex Strategy Group is dead, she announced to the terrified employees. Today, we are relaunching as the Thorn Strategic Ethics Division. Your new mission is not to raid companies, but to heal them. We will find firms corrupted by men like Julian Vance, and we will fix them. You will work to undo the damage you caused. You will do good, or you will be gone. It was a move of ruthless, brilliant strategy. She hadn't just destroyed her enemy. She had absorbed them, repurposed them, and put them to work. 6 months had passed. The Manhattan Superior Court, with its stale air and peeling varnish, felt like a lifetime ago. Ilara Thorn no longer sat on a hard wooden bench. She now occupied a corner office on the 65th floor of the Thorn Global Tower, a sleek monolith of black glass and steel that pierced the sky over Central Park. The office was not what anyone would have expected. There were no ostentatious displays of wealth. The walls were a soft, muted grey. The furniture was minimalist, functional, and lethally elegant. The centerpiece was a massive desk, carved from a single piece of obsidian, but it was almost bare. On it sat only 3 things: an encrypted, paper-thin laptop, a small framed photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes, her mother, and a single, rusty, bent nail displayed on a small museum-quality stand. It was the only thing Ilara had asked Graves to recover from the cabin before the demolition crews had turned it to dust. It was her memento mori, a reminder of what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness. Ilara herself was transformed. The sail rack dress was gone, replaced by a bespoke, dark navy blue suit by Heiress. It was not a statement, it was armor. Her hair, once pulled back in a functional ponytail, was now cut in a sharp, severe bob that framed a face that had lost all its softness. The simple, doe-like eyes were gone. In their place was the calm, assessing, and utterly immovable gaze of a predator who had learned the value of patience. A quiet chime announced the arrival of David Chen. He walked in, no longer the rumpled, idealistic legal aid lawyer. He was now the executive director of the Thorn Foundation, and he wore a tailored suit with the easy confidence of a man who finally had the resources to fight the battles he'd always wanted to win. "David," Ilara said, not looking up from the report she was reading. "Good morning. What's the update on the Boston case?" "Morning, Miss Thorn." He corrected himself. He was the only one in the world who she still allowed to try and call her Ilara, and he failed every time. The role was too big now. We won. The TRO was granted. The husband's forensic accountants, all ex-Mossad, claimed they couldn't find the assets. Ilara finally looked up, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. And, David said, a genuine grin on his face. They didn't expect us to have our own ex-Mossad accountants. We found the Cayman accounts, the Shell Corp in Malta, and the 12-car garage he'd listed as a charitable donation. The judge not only froze everything, he hit the husband with sanctions for contempt. Your Julian Vance playbook worked perfectly. It's not my playbook, David, Elara said, her voice cool. It's their playbook. We just learned to read it. Well, the client, Sarah, she wanted me to thank you. She said you saved her life. Elara's gaze drifted to the rusty nail. We gave her the tools to save her own. That's all. Is the fund ready for her? The New Life stipend is in her account, the security team is in place, and the headhunter has her resume. By the time her ex-husband makes bail, she'll be a ghost, and he'll be broke. Good, Elara said. Who's next? Before David could answer, the door opened again, this time without a chime. Arthur Pendleton entered, his silver hair immaculate, his Brioni suit radiating quiet authority. Arthur, Elara said, her tone shifting from boss to co-conspirator. You look grim. That means the old guard is rattling its cages. Arthur nodded, closing the door and checking, from habit, that it was sealed. To put it mildly, the board meeting is in 1 hour. Cyrus Blackwood has spent the last 48 hours making calls. He's rallying the fossils. They're going to try and block Project Reclamation. Project Reclamation was Elara's first major initiative as a voting member of the Thorn Global Board. It was her proposal to create a $10 billion fund. Its purpose was twofold. First, to create the Thorn Strategic Ethics Division, which had absorbed the functional remnants of Apex, and second, to aggressively acquire and rehabilitate companies that were structurally sound but morally corrupt. It was, as David Chen had called it, a private equity fund with a soul. Elara leaned back in her chair. Cyrus is a relic, Arthur. He's been on this board since my father was using floppy disks. He still thinks ethics is a class he slept through at Yale. He's a relic with 20% of the voting shares, Arthur countered, and he has the loyalty of the entire old money block. They're afraid of you, Elara. Miss Thorne, she corrected him, her voice sharp. Arthur, unlike David, was not permitted that familiarity. He represented her father's world, and in that world, names were power. They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of light. They've been operating in my father's shadow for so long they've forgotten the sun exists. He's going to paint you as emotional, Arthur warned. He's going to call this a vanity project. He's going to stand up in that gravel pit voice of his and say this is an impulsive $10 billion overreaction to an unfortunate marital dispute. He's going to use Julian against you. He's going to try and put you back in that courtroom, in that pathetic black dress. Elara was silent for a long moment. She stood, walking to the great glass wall that overlooked the park. The city was a map of power spread out at her feet. 6 months ago, she said, her voice quiet, I sat in a room and let a man I despised define me. He called me pathetic, unwell, stupid, and his lawyer, a woman who should have been an ally, called me a waste of time. They did it because they thought I had no power. They did it because I was a nobody. She turned, her eyes 2 chips of ice. Cyrus Blackwood is about to make the exact same mistake. He thinks I'm still the nobody. He thinks I'm just a girl who inherited a name. He's about to find out that while I was a nobody, I was listening. What are you going to do? David asked, his voice tense. What I do, Elara said, is turn on the lights. Arthur, are the additional files ready? Arthur Pendleton allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. On a silver platter, Miss Thorne. And the Apex data? Cross-referenced and triple-sourced, Arthur confirmed. The Blackwood file is comprehensive. Good, Elara said. She walked to her desk, picking up a single, black-bound report. David, you're with me. You're not just the head of the foundation. As of today, you're my official nominee for the Acquisitions Committee. David paled. Me? On that committee? Cyrus will have a stroke. That's the point, Elara said. Let's go. It's time to take out the trash. The Thorn Global Boardroom was on the 70th floor, the top floor. It was a tomb. The table was a single, 100-foot-long slab of polished, dark mahogany. The chairs were black leather, high-backed thrones. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, and the only sound was the funereal ticking of a massive 18th-century regulator clock. The old guard was assembled. 12 men, all over the age of 65, all in dark suits, all with faces that looked like they'd been carved from granite. They were the titans of industry, the power brokers, the men who moved markets with a single phone call. And at their head, opposite the empty chair reserved for Elara, sat Cyrus Blackwood. He was a man who looked like a clenched fist. His white hair was a perfect helmet. His eyes were a pale, cold blue, and his voice sounded like gravel being poured into a vault. He was, in every way, the embodiment of old, entrenched, unassailable power. When Elara entered, every man stood. It was a perfunctory, old-world courtesy, and she saw the dismissal in their eyes. David Chen, walking behind her, looked like a minnow entering a shark tank. "Elara, my dear," Cyrus boomed, his voice radiating false warmth. "So good of you to join us, and you brought a friend." He waved a dismissive, beringed hand at David. Elara did not smile. She walked to her chair at the head of the table. She placed her single, black-bound report in front of her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the heavy air. "This is Mr. David Chen, my new executive director, and, as of this morning, my formal proxy for all matters relating to the Ethics and Acquisitions Committee." The collective intake of breath was barely audible, but it was there. David Chen, the underdog lawyer on the Acquisitions Committee. It was a declaration of war. "A bold move, my dear," Cyrus said, his smile tightening. "To business, then. We have your proposal. Project Reclamation. A $10 billion fund for, well, the memo was a bit poetic. Strategic ethics. A noble, if expensive, passion project." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Elara, you are your father's daughter, and we all respect what he built. But you are new to this room. A $10 billion expenditure, your first expenditure, on a charity is simply not how we do business. Thorn Global is not a philanthropic foundation." "Mr. Chen runs the foundation," Elara said calmly. "This is not that." "With all due respect," Cyrus said, the words dripping with condescension. "That is exactly what this is. We've all read the papers about your unfortunate marital situation. We applaud your victory. Truly, a terrible business, but we cannot let a personal and, dare I say, emotional reaction to one bad man dictate the financial policy of a $100 billion empire." There it was. He had put her back in the courtroom. He had called her emotional. He had called her a victim. He was painting her as a hysterical woman, letting her trauma cloud her judgment. The other board members shifted, nodding. This they understood. A woman scorned. Elara looked down at her report. Then she looked up, and her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a CEO. "Thank you, Cyrus," she said, her voice soft. The room leaned in. "Thank you for so perfectly, so ludrously misunderstanding the entire point." She clicked a small, black remote. A massive, high-definition screen, previously hidden behind a slab of mahogany, descended from the ceiling. "You call this philanthropy, Cyrus? You call this emotional?" The screen lit up. It was not a plea for ethics. It was a flowchart, a terrifyingly complex, detailed flowchart of the entire Thorn global supply chain. "For 30 years, Ilara said, her voice now resonant and cold, "you and my father operated on a don't ask, don't tell policy. You built an empire in the shadows. But shadows, gentlemen, are where rot grows." She clicked the remote. A dozen red circles appeared on the chart. "This," she said, pointing to one, "is a logistics company in Singapore. We use it to ship all of our rare earth minerals. Its CEO, we have discovered, is using a shell company, Acheron Imports, sound familiar, Arthur, to systematically short-sell his own deliveries, creating losses that he then bills us for to the tune of $80 million a year." She clicked again. "This is a data processing firm in Ireland. They handle our European payroll. They are also, it appears, selling our employee data to a rival tech conglomerate. The same one, coincidentally, that Julian Vance tried to sell my father's data line to." She went on. Click, click, click. For 10 solid minutes, a chip manufacturer in Taiwan, a private bank in Switzerland, a component supplier in Germany. All of them were compromised. All of them were, in some way, rotting. The room was dead silent. The board members were staring, pale-faced, at the screen. This wasn't a passion project. This was an existential threat. This rot, Ilara continued, was allowed to grow because men like Julian Vance are not anomalies. They are the standard. They are a symptom of a culture you built, a culture of arrogance, of winking, of everyone's doing it, a culture that Apex Strategy Group weaponized. She turned her gaze back to Cyrus Blackwood, who was no longer smiling. "Project Reclamation is not an ethics fund, Mr. Blackwood. It is a war chest. It is a hostile takeover fund. We are not going to ask these companies to do better. We are going to buy them. We are going to fire their corrupt boards. We are going to install our own people. And we are going to fix them. We are going to secure our supply chain. We are not saving the world. We are saving the empire." She let that sink in. The old guard was now looking at her with a new, dawning respect. This was not the language of poetry. This was the language of power. But how do you know all this?" One of the members, a man named Sterling, stammered. These are deep, dark secrets." Ilara smiled, that cold, surgical smile. "Julian Vance was a fool. When he was arrested, the SEC seized his office. I, however, had already acquired his company. And with it, gentlemen, I acquired his servers. He thought I was too stupid to understand his business. The truth is, I just found it distasteful. But I am a very, very fast learner." She clicked the remote one last time. The screen now showed a single ledger, a series of wire transfers. From Blackwood Holdings, subsidiary Div. To Apex Strategy Group. Amount, $200,000. Date, October 14th, 2025. 2 weeks before Julian Vance filed for divorce. "Cyrus," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You said I was letting a personal matter cloud my judgment. But it seems you were the one mixing business with... Well, what was this, Cyrus? A $1.2 million consulting fee to Julian Vance's personal strategy group. What exactly were you consulting him on? How to hide assets? How to defraud a spouse? Or were you perhaps one of the clients looking to buy access to the Thorn data pipeline?" Cyrus Blackwood had gone the color of ash. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You sat on the board of my father's company," Ilara said, her voice a low, vicious thrum. And you paid a man who was actively trying to defraud my family. You didn't just let the rot grow, Cyrus. You were the rot. She stood up, placing her hands flat on the obsidian desk. So here is what is going to happen, she said, her voice now commanding the room. We are going to vote on Project Reclamation. It will pass unanimously. You, Cyrus, will vote yes. Then you will cede your seat on the Acquisitions Committee to Mr. Chen. Finally, you will tender your resignation from this board, effective immediately, citing health reasons. You can't, Cyrus gasped, finding his voice. This is blackmail. I'll fight this. Will you? Ilara asked. You'll fight me? The woman who has your signed wire transfers. The woman who just watched you try to publicly humiliate her. You, like Julian, think this is a fight. You are mistaken. She leaned in. This is a verdict. She looked around the table. At Sterling, at the other 10 men. They would not meet her gaze. They were terrified. Gentlemen, the vote, all in favor of Project Reclamation. Every hand went up. Slowly, surely. Cyrus Blackwood's hand was the last. It was shaking, but it went up. Motion passes, Ilara said, her voice devoid of triumph. Unanimously. Mr. Chen, welcome to the committee. She turned to Cyrus. Cyrus, your resignation. Blackwood stared at her, his face a mask of pure, impotent hatred. But he knew. He was Julian Vance in the courtroom. He was the one who had been outmaneuvered, trapped, and exposed. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold-plated pen, and scribbled his name on the resignation letter Arthur Pendleton had, with perfect timing, just slid in front of him. Thank you for your service, Mr. Blackwood, Ilara said. Graves will see you out. Her head of security, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. Cyrus Blackwood, the Titan, the relic, looked 100 years old. He stood, defeated, and was escorted from the room. Ilara Thorne stood at the head of the table, alone. The remaining board members watched her, a mixture of terror and awe on their faces. She picked up her single black report. Gentlemen, the next item on the agenda. Let's talk about the future. Later that night, the 65th floor office was dark, save for the galaxy of lights from the city below. Ilara stood at the window, not seeing the view. David Chen was at the door, his briefcase in hand. That was... he started, then stopped. That was a massacre, Ilara. She flinched at her name. He saw it. Miss Thorne, he corrected, his voice quiet. I came to fight for the underdogs. What was that? Ilara turned from the window. Her face, in the shadows, looked impossibly weary. That, she said, was a necessary correction, David. Cyrus Blackwood and Julian Vance are the same man. Julian was just cheaper. Julian used a gavel. Cyrus used a boardroom. The underdogs you and I fight for? They are the ones who get crushed when men like that hold the power. She walked to her desk and picked up the rusty nail, turning it over in her fingers. My father built an empire in the shadows, and the rot set in. I am not my father. What are you then? David asked, his voice raw. Ilara looked at the nail, then at the sprawling city, a kingdom of light and darkness. I'm the one, she said, who is turning on the lights. What did you think of Ilara's epic transformation? Seeing Julian's and Ms. Harding's faces when Arthur Pendleton walked in and dropped that $98 million cabin bombshell, priceless. This is a story that proves you should never underestimate the quiet ones. They aren't just listening, they're taking notes. If you love stories of epic karmic justice, where the villain gets exactly what they deserve and the hero rises from the ashes to take back their power, then you know what to do. Show your support by smashing that like button. It tells us you want more stories of sweet, sweet revenge. Share this video with someone who needs to see that karma is always watching. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. We have a library full of dramatic stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Comment below with "Welcome home, Elara," if you stayed until the end and are ready for the next story.